talking about an indie comic called Starside, created by Dylan Klein, co-written by Lane Brettschneider, and illustrated by Jordan Chao. I was lucky enough to meet Klein and Brettschneider at Granite State Comic Con this year. They were tabling and I was able to talk to them a bit about the comic and their concept behind it. After talking to them for a while about their comic, I ended up buying all 4 issues that are currently out. The 5th one is beginning their Kickstarter campaign in February. I'm a big advocate for indie titles. I think that there needs to be competition in order for the industry to do well, and there needs to be creativity, which you can't always get with larger, more industrialized comic books. Since reading all 4 issues and kind of sitting on them for a while, I decided to talk about them. So I'm going to go over the storyline so far, my thoughts on the characters' art and writing, and my overall feelings of the series as it stands. If you want to jump around the video or go right to the part where I give my final thoughts, then I'll add timestamps so that you can do that. Starside follows Jack through an alien invasion while he's at school. He gets kidnapped and brought aboard an alien spaceship. While in the ship, he meets a few other humans, some of whom have unexplainable superpowers. These powers were brought up in issue 1 with a teacher at Jack's school showing abilities, but it's made clear in issue 2 when there are 2 named characters, Mitch and Mary. There's a brief conversation where Mary asks Jack if he has powers, which he doesn't seem to. Mary and Mitch conduct a coup to overthrow the ship. This ends up crash landing the vessel on an alien world. From there, Jack quickly finds another young alien, Riggs, who he bribes with the wreckage of the ship in order to find a way back to Earth. There are also many smaller details with Jack, such as the series establishing his sister, who is homesick when the world gets invaded, or the death of Jack's best friend. These strings together details of Jack's pre-invasion world, but don't have a firm grip of significance on the story. For having such a grim concept, the series isn't overly violent. In a Kickstarter FAQ, the team compares Starside's violence to Star Wars. I'm really just giving the synopsis to tell you where the story is at the moment. Who knows what will happen in the future with the comic as far as its progression goes. Firstly, I'm going to say what I don't generally like about the characters in Starside, since it's a pretty universal thing, across the board. So for me, none of the characters really crossed my interest from the get-go, and none of them have much time focused on who they really are. There aren't many issues out, but I can't get attached to characters from the start, which makes it harder to maintain interest later. Sometimes a comic feels so pressured to get from point A to point B that it doesn't let its characters breathe or establish why the audience should care about them. Jack is Starside's main character. He has a normal enough time in school, a best friend he can rely on through thick and thin, and a sister he clearly cares about. This is, of course, before a random alien invasion decimates his world. From the aliens landing onward, we see Jack truly terrified of his situation. We see him need to stretch his mind around the concept of being trapped, on the run, and lost in space. I think Jack's mundanity is nice in that it creates him as an everyman character. Anyone could be in Jack's shoes, it just happens to be him. I do like that the main character isn't one of the humans that get superpowers. It's kind of nice to see him just being a normal human. A negative, I would say, is that Jack often feels pushed by the plot more than by his own ambitions. I hope that in future issues we can see what he cared about before the end of the world, what his family life was like, or what his hopes and dreams were while on Earth, and what he thinks about being so far from home aside from the obvious fear. As an aside, there is a very sweet article on Starside's original Kickstarter campaign where Klein talked about the creation of Starside. He points out that he'd been thinking up this comic since he was 12, originally modeling Jack after himself, and that it was the push from his fiancée that finally made Starside a reality. It's not super relevant, but it seems very romantic, and I just thought it was sweet, so I wanted to mention it. I'm talking about the characters of Mary and Mitch together since they're initially introduced as a duo. Mary is the calm and collected one, and Mitch is quite literally more fiery. He literally has fire powers, and it's reflective of his personality. They are the 2 superpowered humans who plan to topple the spaceship. When the plan goes awry, Mitch overuses his powers and causes the spaceship to explode. Mary uses her force field powers to save Jack. We don't get a whole lot with them, but I did like the dynamic that the 2 had. I could totally see them coming back at a future date, since this is comics and anything is possible. The Starside Facebook page describes Riggs as a young space pilot with a lot to prove. Originally introduced while shopping in the Avon Market, Riggs later saves Jack in issue 3 from being attacked by the Solvents. This prompts Jack into bribing Riggs with the wreckage of the spaceship in order to find a way home. In issue 4 of the series, we also see that Riggs has what looks to be the same type of brand that Jack has burned into his skin in issue 1. The Solvents serve as the main antagonists of the series so far. They're a race of alien invaders acting kind of like the Fire Nation or the Evil Horde. I'm assuming we'll eventually get more details on the who, what, and why of the Solvents, but I don't personally mind big bad evil guys every once in a while whose whole thing is being evil. Overall, the characters of Starside don't stand out to me, but I like the base of all of them. There's a nostalgia to the comic that I really can't explain. The vagueness of the world could also be excused with the limited amount of issues for this series so far. They clearly care about their world, with many, many threads talking about the group's characters we don't even know yet. Starside is illustrated by Jordan Chao. Visually, Chao uses quick, sketchy line work, which goes well with the style and tone of the story. The colors are nice, with rich washes covering pages and keeping panels cohesive. One of the best uses of this is on page 2 of issue 1, where we're snapped from Jack hiding in alien woods to his last day on Earth. The division between the two realities is hit home with the start cut from red to yellow. Chao often uses colors to divide spaces. In issue 1, Jack and his friend stick out from the background of the school by being in full color against a more analogous backdrop. I really like how the crowds were visually divided against the characters of interest. This slowly disappears until Jack is finally brought to space, at which point almost all the characters are individually fully colored. I don't know if it was intentional, but I thought this was a nice visual representation of the gray and mundanity of Jack's Earth life disappearing. Chao's visuals also don't shy away from detail, and I think some of the more vast and establishing shots are just so cool, although smaller panels can be a little too cluttered or unnecessarily detailed at times, particularly when in places like the Avon Market. My biggest negative to the art of Starside is the pacing. In my opinion, it fluctuates a bit too much depending on the scene. Examples are when Jack takes a sword from an alien ship. It is shown in the background and then suddenly in his hand in the second to next panel, without him visually acknowledging or reaching for it. Or in issue 2, with Mary talking to Jack about the possibility of him having powers. The scene shifts a little too quickly from their discussion to a fight with the Solvents. I think the action can be a tad hard to follow in this particular scene. Mileage will vary for this though, depending on how much you feel like you need establishing shots in comics, or how much direction you need with movement and page layout. One moment that really shined to me was in issue 3 when Jack is discussing his situation with Riggs, while the two are also disposing of a Solvent corpse. The dialogue works really well and is paired with some of my favorite pacing in the issues right now. Both visually and vocally, the characters are able to take their time and have some conversation while also completing an action. The sci-fi-ness in Chao's work is also there, with interesting looking structures, weapons, and character designs. It relies on rawness to establish a vibe that is very familiar in the sci-fi genre, with a grungier visual style similar to Star Wars. It's definitely less comparable to more surrealist stuff like Star Trek or The Fantastic Planet. It's more science and less fiction, I guess, but the aliens and structures are still kept very alien, if that makes sense. The creative and unique hits are all there when they need to be, such as for character designs and spaceships. I felt like many of the alien species particularly had unique looks about them. Generally, the writing is quick and doesn't focus too much on speech bubbles. When they are used, conversations always have a purpose. It's a nice change of pace to have a comic that allows the visuals to move a story forward without every action being explained by a character. I feel like the art and fluidity of comics as a genre can get overshadowed by large text boxes or speech bubbles taking up more space than necessary. I didn't think Starside was a particularly funny comic, at least not as far as the issues available go. There's no Spider-Man level quips or running jokes. A few lines made me smile, but given the tone and plot of the book being about a kidnapped teenager, I'm not sure if laugh level comedy would be a direction we're trying anyways. As I mentioned in the characters section, I think the biggest gripe I have with the writing is that the characters don't expand much on their motivations or depth. But again, there's only 4 issues out, and I'm pretty confident that that will be coming later on. Just to mention it in writing, since I don't think it's entirely a visuals issue, I again think that the pacing could use some work overall. It's not terrible, it's not even bad. It's just sort of, I feel like if they tweaked it a little bit, then it could be even stronger. I may be biased since I've met two of the people working on the comic, but I really see the potential for this series. The concept is there and it's really cool. Stylistically and in an ideal sense, this comic hits a mark for me. I mentioned it before, but it has a weird nostalgia that I can't really explain, but feels very familiar. It plays it safe in regards to its genre while getting creative with characters and lore. Overall, I'm excited to see what happens with the series and planning on participating in their next Kickstarter for issue 5 when it's available in February. There are a few areas that need polish, but I'm a big fan of what they have going so far. It's a really neat indie title with a lot of heart behind it. Hey, thanks for checking out my review. This is my second time making a comic-related YouTube video, and it's been a lot of fun. I actually have a microphone this time instead of recording through my computer, so hopefully it sounds better. I'll post the social medias for Starside in the description, and I totally suggest checking them out. I haven't seen a whole lot of people discussing this comic online, which kind of feels like a shame. Sorry if you can hear people mowing outside. I just realized that that's really loud. Anyway, thanks for checking out my video. I'll also try to post my own social media if I remember, or maybe I won't. Thanks again. Bye.